A very good morning, my dear students. I hope you're all well and safe and practicing all the precautions so that everyone remains healthy and safe from all kinds of microbial diseases. Today we will discuss gram-positive cocci in Practical 3. I hope you've all gone through the lecture, and if you have any queries, please feel free to connect with me. So you're already familiar with this particular smear. This is a smear from a colony, and you can see, I wish we were face to face and I could ask you what you see, but just think in your mind's eye what it could be. So yes, this is gram-positive cocci in clusters. And when you see gram-positive cocci in clusters, you start thinking that it belongs to the family Micrococcaceae, of which Staphylococcus is an important member. And since we are talking in terms of disease-producing bacteria, Staphylococcus aureus is the most important virulent bacteria in this particular genera, that is Staphylococcaceae. So do remember that the size of the individual cocci is around 1 micron in diameter, and you can see that they are in clusters because they do not separate. The mother cell and the daughter cells do not separate, and thus you can see them in a three-dimensional picture. Now when we grow Staphylococcus, we can use three different types of media. You know the Staphylococcus, all Staphylococci are non-fastidious, so they will easily grow on nutrient agar. And when you see the picture, this is nutrient agar, and you can see a very nice isolated colonies. So all these are isolated colonies, and what you also see is that they are around 2 to 3 millimeters. Of course, when you see it in the plate in the practical, it will be much clearer, but you can see it's 2 to 3 millimeter, and there is a distinct pigment. You can see that nice yellow pigment, and you know that the word aureus was given to Staphylococcus because of this non-diffusible yellow pigment. What else can you see? You can see that it is opaque and it is smooth, it has entire edges, and it is, of course, on nutrient agar you cannot tell about the characteristics of the hemolysis. So blood agar is an excellent medium. Now this is of course blood agar. It is an excellent medium for all kinds of microbes, whether they are pathogenic or non-pathogenic, and it is also an indicator medium. So you can see golden colonies again, yellowish colonies which are opaque. You can see very clearly they're opaque, they're kind of moist. And here I like to tell you that some Staph aureus are capsulated, and the capsule is a micro capsule. It's not like a classic capsule, it's a micro capsule about 200 nanometer in size. And so you can see that the edges are smooth, the surface is also smooth, they're easily emulsifiable. And what is very important is that that zone of beta hemolysis, which you can see. Now what is beta hemolysis? Beta hemolysis is complete lysis of RBCs, which is done by both Staph aureus and Streptococci. So blood agar, as I told you, is an excellent medium for all media. So whether it is staph, which is actually non-fastidious, or strep, which is fastidious, both will go on blood agar. Now this medium is mannitol salt agar, and mannitol salt agar, is a selective medium because it allows staph to grow and not the other. So the salt in this medium makes it selective for Staphylococcaceae, and mannitol is an indicator sugar which is used for differentiating Staph aureus from the other staph. So mannitol is fermented, and so the pH changes to acidic and the bacteria will look yellow. Alright, so there is phenol red here, which is the indicator, and you can see that light, that reddish tinge here. So initially the medium is this nice reddish orange, and when Staph aureus grows on it, or uh, say coagulase negative Staph grows on it, you will see the growth, right? But now mannitol becomes an important indicator because Staph aureus will ferment mannitol, the pH will come down, and phenol red will convert to yellow. And you see, so all this is Staph aureus. On the other hand, coagulase negative staph, which are unable to ferment mannitol, will still look pink. So you can distinguish on the basis of mannitol salt agar whether it is Staph aureus or coagulase negative. More importantly, it is selective, so only Staph family genera will grow on that, right? Of course, blood agar is also telling you on the basis of the pigment and on the basis of the hemolysis that it looks like Staph aureus, but there are some Staph aureus which may not be beta hemolytic. So, but predominantly you should understand if it's a golden pigment and there is a zone of hemolysis and it is opaque, then in all probability the chances are that it is Staph aureus. Now, once we've done a presumptive differential diagnosis on the basis of the grams and on the basis of the growth on blood agar or mannitol salt agar or nutrient agar, we need to now confirm our understanding. So we start performing certain biochemical tests, which really are tests which look for the presence or absence of enzymes. So catalase is an enzyme which is present in staph or in all Staphylococci, and it is not present in Streptococci. So you take a drop of H2O2 and you touch. So this is in the bubbling you're seeing over here. You can see that you take a drop of 2 or 3 drops of H2O2, put it on a clean glass slide, and then pick up the golden colonies from the blood agar and you dip it into the catalase, into the H2O2. And when you start seeing bubbles, as you can see very well over here, then you can say that this looks like family Staphylococci. And if you do not see bubbles as you see here, then you can understand that this is not family Staphylococci, it is Streptococci. So catalase is the one test which will differentiate between the two families, and that is the first test which you have to perform. Now, once catalase is positive, and of course you've seen the beta hemolysis as well, you want to now confirm whether it is Staph aureus or whether it is some other species of Staph. And here the enzyme coagulase becomes very, very useful. This enzyme is present in Staphylococcus aureus and it is usually negative in coagulase negative Staph. So what we do here is that we take a drop of plasma, and in the drop of plasma we uh, emulsify Staph aureus colonies or Staph aureus, or we can do it another way, that we take saline uh, and in the saline we emulsify Staph aureus. In fact, that is the better thing to do, is to emulsify Staph aureus in the saline, look to see whether it is smooth emulsion or are there auto-agglutinated clumps. If there are auto-agglutination which is seen, then we cannot proceed with slide coagulase. We need to do something which is called tube coagulase, which is here, and I will come to that shortly. So once you've made the emulsion in saline, you'll drop 2 or 3 drops of human plasma or rabbit plasma and mix it well and rock it, like rock it up and down movement, and then you start looking for clumps. Now the clumps are very clear here, as you can see, and that means that the enzyme coagulase is present, as against here where it still remains a uniform emulsion and there is no clumps. Now, why do clumps form? The clumps form because of the coagulase which is bound to Staph aureus, so the cell wall of Staph aureus, which communicates with the prothrombin, which then changes fibrinogen, and then which then activates fibrinogen, and further fibrinogen is converted to fibrin. Now that fibrin coats the staphylococcus, and you can see it as I showed you as clumps, and these may also act as virulence factors, as you know. So if slide coagulase is positive, you can confirm your initial diagnosis and say that this looks like Staph aureus. However, if it is negative and you've seen beta hemolytic golden yellow opaque colonies, then you need to proceed to a test which is the tube coagulase, as you can see very well here. Now, tube coagulase does not detect bound coagulase, which is what we are looking for in the slide agglutination test. We are looking for an intrinsic coagulase enzyme, which is called coagulase reacting factor. Now, this is an enzyme which is secreted out of the bacterium, and it again communicates with the plasma and converts fibrinogen to fibrin, and thus you can see this nice clot which you can appreciate over here. The clot may take 1 hour to 6 hours to produce. So you put it in a when you put it in an incubator, you don't put it in the regular incubator, you put it in a water bath at 37 degrees centigrade, and you look for this picture. Now, a very interesting thing is that if you leave it overnight, sometimes that fibrin clot, which you see here, may actually lyse because of plasminogen, which is released by uh, staph aureus. So, the staphylolysin, which is a plasminogen, can lyse it. So, it's very important to actually interpret it within the first 6 hours. Now, once we have identified the bacteria, it is very important, as you know, we're living in the age of antimicrobial resistance. We cannot send a report simply saying that it's Staph aureus. We need to do antibiotic susceptibility testing, and this is how it is done. So you take your isolated strain of Staph and make a lawn culture. So what you're seeing here is the lawn culture of Staph, as against in the earlier plate, what you saw was isolated colonies of Staph, and now we take 3-4 colonies from those isolated colonies and swab it on a plate to make a lawn culture. Now once the lawn culture has been swabbed, we place this on the plate at suitable distances, and then we incubate it overnight. And when we open the plate next day, sorry, what do we see? We see zones of inhibition. Now, if there are zones of inhibition, it means that the bacteria is susceptible to that particular antibiotic, and this we can report in the report and say that these are the drugs which can be given to the patient. However, this is cefoxitin, and if you remember, we've discussed MRSA, and when we want to identify MRSA, we use the disc oxacillin, or we use more increasingly using the disc cefoxitin, which is more sensitive. Now, if it is cefoxitin resistant or oxacillin resistant, then what do we call this bacteria? We call this bacteria MRSA, that is methicillin resistant Staph aureus. So even if your cephalosporins are coming sensitive, or even if the penicillin group, some of them are coming sensitive, or macrolides are coming sensitive, or fluoroquinolones are coming sensitive, we do not take that into account, and we immediately recommend that vancomycin should be given, because we know that along with resistance to methicillin, the bacteria takes up a lot of resistance factors, and thus acquires resistance to many of them, even though there may be in vitro susceptibility. So the drug of choice becomes vancomycin. Now these are the gram stain appearance of another bacteria, which is Streptococcus pyogenes. Most streptococci will give you this kind of appearance, that is gram positive cocci in chains, and you can see that the chains are very long. So this is very characteristic appearance of Streptococcus pyogenes. Here you can see the fibrinous material because it's been taken from a clinical isolate, and again you can see the nice long chains. So when you see chains, long chains, you want to start thinking of Streptococcus pyogenes. What media would you like to culture this on? So you've seen it directly from the clinical sample, and now you need to decide which media you will want to grow it on. So what do you think is the media you want to use? So yes, you want to use blood agar because this is a fastidious bacteria. And on blood agar, what do you see? You see these pinpoint tiny colonies which are much smaller than what you see in staph, and you see a very broad zone of hemolysis which is again much broader than what you see in staph, and the colonies are translucent as against what you see in staph. So they're translucent, they are not pigmented, and of course they are fastidious. So what test would you like to do now? You've seen these pinpoint colonies, you know they're beta hemolytic. What is the first test you would like to perform? So the first test actually is catalase. Catalase should be negative, and once it is catalase negative, then you need to start distinguishing between group A strep and group B strep, which are the common bacteria. Of course, it also depends on the clinical sample, but group A, group B, group C, group G are the usual common beta hemolytic strep seen in infection in man. So once we have done catalase and that is negative, we proceed to identification of the different serotypes. So bacitracin is a very simple test. You do a lawn culture, or even in suppose it's from a throat swab, a child came with sore throat and you think it's streptococcus. In the primary isolation plate itself, like I am isolating the sample, the bacteria from the throat swab, and in the primary secondary well, I have plated the bacitracin, and the next day, so bacitracin disc was placed on the streaks, and it was incubated, and the next day you saw this nice zone of inhibition. Now the zone of inhibition is around 15 to 16 millimeter, and this tells you quickly that this is streptococcus pyogenes. So why should this be done? This should be done in this way because we are saving time. Ideally, what is done is that you isolate it on day one. That is, I get the clinical sample and I use blood. I've done the gram stain and I simply plate it on blood agar, put it in incubator, and next day, if I see pinpoint beta, then I will put bacitracin. But that means that it will take another 24 hours. That means it will take 48 hours in all for me to be able to identify strep pyogenes, which is far too long. So what can one do? One can plate it on the primary isolation plate, and if it is group A strep and it is almost predominantly pure, then you can see it like this, and then you can report it as strep pyogenes rather than saying, oh, it's beta hemolytic strep, and I will confirm whether it is strep pyogenes or something else. Of course, I can also do bacitracin susceptibility testing like this. So, you do a straight inoculum across the plate, and you once you inoculate it, so this is how it's inoculated, and in the middle one can place the bacitracin disc and again incubate overnight and see the next day. So here you can see that this is resistant to bacitracin, while this strain is susceptible to bacitracin. As you can see that there is a zone of inhibition, while here there is no zone of inhibition. So this is group B strep, and this is group, and this one is group A strep. So once bacitracin is done, so usually we do two tests. One is bacitracin and the other is CAM. So on another plate of blood agar, what do? We take a staph aureus, a beta hemolytic staph, and plate it vertically down, right? And on the other side, I will plate my test sample and I can plate my control and incubate it again. So you can see that at right angles to staph, one can plate the test as well as the control. I'll just discuss that with you. You can see it very clearly here again that one is this strain and the other is this, and we incubate it. The next day what we see is that there is this enhanced zone of hemolysis if it is group B. So group B releases a CAM factor, and that CAM factor leads to further enhancement of hemolysis, and this test is also called the CAM test because it tests for the presence of CAM factor, which is seen in group B. Now group A strep, you can see here, is beta hemolytic, but it does not lead to any enhancement, and so this is negative for CAM, and this one is positive for CAM test. So this is group B. Usually what we do is we have a positive control and a negative control. So this is my negative control for camp. This is my positive control for camp, and of course here is the test strain which is coming positive. This is just a smiley where you can see that there's bacitracin. There are two bacitracin discs, one here and one here. How do you interpret this? How do you interpret it? So you interpret it on the basis of susceptibility. This is susceptible, so this is group A. This is resistant, so this is group B. And then you do a CAMP test, and if you see this nice zone of hemolysis, you know this is group B. This is just a designing which has been done, but I was just explaining to you. Now, you already are familiar that Streptococcus pyogenes retains susceptibility to penicillin. So we may or may not do susceptibility for all patients, but this is the way it is done. So you can see that the plate is also blood agar because it is fastidious, and you do a lawn culture as you can see over here, and you place the disc and incubate it, and the next day you will see that all of them are susceptible. So strep pyogenes may have more virulence factors, but Staph aureus may not have may has virulence factors which may not be so very uh, virulent, but it trades it with antimicrobial resistance in the form of methicillin resistance, which is a change in the penicillin binding protein 2A. It is a chromosomal change. This is the longest chain in the Streptococci family, which is Streptococcus salivarius, which is usually a non-pathogen. Now we come to the gram stain of Streptococcus pneumoniae, which is a diplococci. It is associated, as you know, with pneumonia and meningitis. And here you can see the diplococci very well. And if they are arranged like this, then you can see the flame-shaped bacteria, and they can sometimes be arranged in chains, as you can see over here, but usually they are seen as individual um, uh, diplococci. And you will see that white halo, which you've seen, of course, in the previous practical also, and that white halo represents the capsule. So, what staining will you now proceed to? Once you suspect, you've seen these lanceolate, flame-shaped diplococci with a halo, what further test would you like to do on microscopy? So India Ink is one, and Quelang test is another, which is almost confirmatory because you know it has the antibody. So the capsule represents the antigen, and you know that there are more than 100 types of capsular serotypes, and then we can raise antibodies against them, and we can do that in Quellang's reaction, which gives you a very nice uh, confirmation that this is Streptococcus pneumoniae and also which serotype it is. So Streptococcus pneumoniae is again very fastidious. It is even more fastidious than Streptococcus pyogenes or the beta hemolytic strep, and you can see that it is alpha hemolytic. So on blood agar, it grows both on blood agar and chocolate agar, and the characteristic feature, of course, is that it is alpha hemolytic and it is translucent. The one test which one can easily perform for Streptococcus pneumoniae is the optogen sensitivity test. It is exactly like vasopressin, and you can see that once a lawn culture is made and you put the optogen disc and you again incubate it 24 hours, with the next day what you see is this nice zone of inhibition. Over here you can see that this is there are two alpha hemolytic strains which have been plated side by side. Here you see no zone of inhibition, and here you see a very nice zone of inhibition. And when there is a zone of inhibition like this, you know it is Streptococcus pneumoniae. Now coming to Enterococcus faecalis, which is now distinct from Streptococci. It is a very hardy bacteria. It is primarily inhabitant of the GI tract, and thus you know if it is an inhabitant of the GI tract, then you know that it is resistant to bile. It can grow in the presence of bile. So now again, usually you see them as not really diplococci, but see them in pairs, and they are usually arranged in obtuse angles, which is a very characteristic appearance of enterococci. So they are ovoid, they are arranged in obtuse angles, and here of course you can see the pus cells as well. Now We have already discussed that enterococcus can be alpha, can be beta, can be gamma. So here I'm showing you a gamma, a plate with no hemolysis. But if you see beta hemolysis, then you will try to differentiate it from Streptococcus pyogenes and A. gallictae. And if it is alpha hemolytic, then you will want to differentiate it from Streptococcus pneumoniae on the one hand and Streptococcus viridans on the other, which are also alpha hemolytic. So bile esculin test is a very simple test which is done for enterococcus, and esculin is high. You can see that if it is enterococcus, then the change, there is growth of the bacteria and there is change in color, as you can see here in this tube as well as in the plate, and that is because esculin has been hydrolyzed to esculitin. And whenever we do these tests, you can see we put up control. So there's a negative control and there's a positive control, which tells us that the medium is correct and the interpretation is also correct. So that is all for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. And all the best. Stay safe, stay healthy. Bye bye.